A new legislative proposal would allow felons to vote in federal elections, but not for state and local offices. I spoke with Marc Mauer. He's executive director of the Sentencing Project. It's an organization that works toward a fair and effective U.S. criminal justice system by promoting reforms. He says the U.S. policies are not in line with those elsewhere.
We have the world's highest rate of incarceration. We're virtually the only Western democracy still maintains the death penalty. And when it comes to disenfranchisement, losing the right to vote, many countries in Western Europe or Canada permit everyone to vote, including people in prison. To the extent they take away the right to vote, it's only during the time they're in prison. As soon as they're out, they regain it. Whereas in the United States, it's not at all uncommon. Millions of people on probation, parole, or who finished their sentences still unable to vote.
And one of the things I think about is that some of the people that have felony convictions might not necessarily be in prison in other places, or they might get a slap on the wrist, that sort of thing. That's another thing that's also factored into this, correct?
Well, that is, the war on drugs just expanded so enormously, and then we had, the stop and frisk policies. So it's not that difficult to acquire a felony conviction, particularly in low-income African-American communities. It doesn't mean these people are lifelong criminals or anything, but they've acquired a felony conviction, and then it carries with them the rest of their lives in many cases.
Now, I mentioned Representative Conyers. He's introduced a bill that would permit former inmates to vote in elections for federal posts. Why is that important, and what do you think the odds are that that could pass?
Well, I think the theory behind it, Representative Conyers, is that, when we're voting in federal elections for president, for U.S. Senate, the House, essentially we should all play by the same rules. It shouldn't depend on which state you vote in, whether people with convictions vote or don't vote. We should all play by the same rules, even if the individual states don't permit you to vote in state elections. So it would be a more uniform possibility. It's hard to say what the prospects are. It's going to be an uphill fight, certainly. I think it's one of those multi-year campaigns, most likely, but we are seeing support both on the left and the right. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky has been very outspoken about the need for reform as well. So there are possibilities of moving this along.
You, I think, touched on this, but talk to us about disenfranchised communities who are impacted by these laws.
Well, disenfranchisement really follows the dynamics of the court system, and we know that it's skewed very heavily towards racial ethnic minorities. 60% of the people in prison are African American or Latino, and we see extreme rates of disenfranchisement. So 1 of every 13 African American adults is disenfranchised. In a few states, it's as much as 1 in 5. So it affects not just the individual, but now we're talking about whole voting blocks in different communities as well.
Whole voting blocks can also drive policy, and a lot of people feel very strongly that the policies when it comes to the criminal justice system, prisons, I mean, we still have, in many cases, there's solitary confinement. Even in some cases I've seen where juvenile delinquents are faced with that, which in other countries is seen as just extreme. That's another consideration, isn't it? If these people can vote, can actually have a stake in things, it may drive the needle in a different direction.
Yeah, well, we're seeing, essentially because of the racial dynamics, that African-American voter turnout is suppressed, essentially, even though those who are eligible vote at high rates. And not that all African-Americans or any other racial group think identically on any given issue, but it just means in a democracy, as we develop policy, why wouldn't we want everyone's voice at the table?